All right, the sassy light is on, which means I am excited to welcome our next guest to the podcast. I first met Paul Kramer when I interviewed him for a role on a team that I was working on. We shared a background in marketing and a quick-witted sense of humor. I liked him immediately. What can I say? We were both misfits. He spent 30 plus years in marketing and business development at companies like American Express, Visa, J. Walter Thompson Advertising, Viacom, and Citibank. Throughout his career, he has also worked on many of the world's most recognizable brands across travel, retail, and entertainment industries. He recently transitioned out of corporate America so that he could focus working on the things that he truly enjoys doing. Novel idea. And today, you'll find him wearing many different hats. He's the founder of a marketing consultancy called the Loyalty Advisors. He's an adjunct professor of marketing at Fordham University in New York, where he teaches graduate level classes in strategic brand management and loyalty program management. He's an assistant golf coach at Fordham University, and he and his wife are actively raising a son getting ready to go off to college. Last year, Paul had invited me to be a guest speaker for a few of his classes. Together with a colleague, we provided a behind-the-scenes look at what it's really like to work in brand marketing for a large company. As many of you remember, going through school, whether it be undergraduate or graduate school, working in corporate America is hard to visualize. You have this idea of what it's going to be like to bring all of your academic training to the real world, and then you make that first transition and you walk through those doors and, well, quite frankly, you're a bit shocked. So in our talk, we gave some real life examples of what it was like. It was during this class that one of the students raised their hands and said, when you two start a podcast, will you please let us know? We may have been a little bit slapstick funny. So I hope those students are listening today, and I thank them for their inspiration for Misfits. And they also get to see their esteemed professor on the show. So Paul, thank you for inviting me to your class to speak. And now, thank you for joining us here on the first season of the Misfits podcast. I am so glad that you said yes.
Well, thanks for having me. It really is great to be here and to see it from the inception of an idea that you need to do a podcast to now being called an esteemed professor and being on it. It's really exciting. So I'm thrilled to be here.
So I just provided a bit of background on, well, your misfit career adventures, which I can't wait to really get into. But I'm always curious about how others view themselves. When you meet people for the first time, how do you introduce yourself?
You know, that's a great question because quite honestly, I'm terrible at it. But it would be similar to what you just said. I would say to people, after spending 30 plus years in corporate America and quite honestly, not really knowing what I wanted to do and having a lot of great jobs and doing well in most of them, there was always something missing and I never really felt like I fit in. So a few years ago, I spent some time working with a coach and trying to understand what is it that I really want to do. So from that, I've actually identified three or four things I like to do, and I'm leading the later half of my career based on those. So what I would say to people is, so after going through that journey, I'm teaching, I'm coaching, and I'm running a marketing consultancy. And the big thing about all of it is it's all under my control and I get to do things, you know, when I want to do them and what I want to do and actually have a lot of control over it. That's how I would say what I'm doing right now. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because there's all these little pieces that have kind of come together. It might be actually kind of hard to say I am this and put myself into this box of I am a teacher or a professor or a dad or all these things because it's kind of putting all of those stories together in one.
Yeah, and I think in the past I tried to put myself in a box and it didn't fit in that box. So I was really terrible. And a great story example, a number of years ago, this probably goes back 25 years ago, I was really set on getting into sports marketing. And I had been sort of on the periphery of it. And of course, with all the sports marketing companies here, or with all the leagues and teams here in New York, I went right down Park Avenue and went to the Major League Baseball, the NFL, the NBA, and the National Hockey League. And of course, I went into all of those, and I went to the National Hockey League, and I had an envelope that looked like it was being hand delivered by, a messenger, so it looked important. And I put it on the receptionist's desk, and I head out, and I get into the elevator, and a hand stops the elevator, and who steps in? Gary Bettman, the commissioner of the National Hockey League. And he looked at me and he said, "Oh, hi, how are you?" And of course, I probably mumbled something incoherent because I really didn't have that elevator spiel as to how, who am I? I didn't know how to answer that question. Yeah. Well, we rode the elevator down. We chatted a little bit. He was about to get into a cab. And then, of course, I made the situation even worse when he said, "Where are you going?" And I said, "Uptown." He said, "Too bad, I'm going downtown." And I should have just jumped in. But the whole point was I was not prepared. And of course, I never ended up working there.
Yeah, and we're gonna talk a lot about that because I know that that's an area that you and I both have a lot of interest in, is figuring out that how do I get prepared for that. But I want to take a step back before we do. So, as you know, and most anybody who is listening to this this whole podcast is about career transitions, right? And I think you've been through a lot of that. And I know it took you a while to kind of get to that coach. But when you think about some of these transitions that you've made throughout your career, is there a particular philosophy that you have followed in terms of how you build your career over time?
So the short answers are no and then yes. So throughout, I'll call my early career, which was everything up until about 5 years ago, I'm not sure I called it a career. I had jobs. And I never understood the concept of managing your career, nor did I know how to do it. And quite honestly, that's, I think, where I'm a bit of a misfit, because places like American Express, managing your career was literally a second job there. And everyone was expected to be in their role for 2 years and move, and 2 years and move. And I never felt like within 2 years you're really contributing. And I kind of grew up as if, like, do a really good job, contribute, and then the rewards will pay off. I since found that that's kind of a bunch of bullshit, because you really need to manage your career. So later on, after trying to figure out, like, I knew there was this gnawing thing in the back of my brain saying, got to do something, you got to figure out what you like, but I didn't know how to go about doing it. And then I was actually handed a gift. Sometimes a gift comes up and presents itself and you don't actually know it's a gift. I had a few of those early in my career where I was asked to take certain jobs, and I looked at them and said, well, why would I move to California, or why would I take that job? It's not what I'd like to do. But what I didn't understand is they were actually offering me a gift which had potentially some short-term pain, but it was so I could get exposure to senior leadership and work for some of the most senior people in the company. And to me, that was just all pain, right? So when I was at Visa with you, and you remember we had that reorg after the global client group, sort of the idea kind of disbanded and everything went back to the regions. There was a VP job I was up for. And quite honestly, I knew I had no chance to get the job. And it was basically some things that the hiring manager had said along the way were sort of those key indicators that I wasn't going to get the job. But I also realized I actually didn't want that job. It still wasn't me. And quite honestly, I had done that job in a similar way at American Express. It was just less complex. So my new leader, and credit to him, as not only my new leader, but a new leader in the organization, said, "Hey, Paul, Visa has a program. We hire independent third-party coaches to help people identify what what other positions within the company or what you want to do throughout your career and how do you manage your career." And I remember he made this comment. He goes, "I have a feeling this is going to come back to bite me in the ass someday." Well, and it did, because I laughed. But it was a gift, and I still am appreciative. So we worked with a coach to put together what was really a purpose statement. It was extremely uncomfortable 8 weeks of doing some real soul searching, but I highly recommend everyone go through it. And when I say it's uncomfortable, it's really uncomfortable. Like, you really have to think deep down, what are those things that make you truly satisfied? Where are you truly content? And what energizes you and makes you get up in the morning? So we went through a process where I identified times in my life where I was truly content and happy, both personal and professional. And from that, we put a purpose statement together. And that purpose statement had 5 key points to it. So this is a long-winded way of saying I manage my career now through those 5 points. And if something only hits 1 or 2 of them, I'm very polite to the person. I say, "Gee, thanks for bringing that up. I hadn't thought about it." But either I'll think about it. Or, I've put this purpose statement together and only hits a couple of them, so it's not of interest to me. And people appreciate when I say that. If it hits 3, now I got something to talk about. If it hits 4, it's kind of a home run. And there are very few things in the world that actually hit 5. So I use that. I guess I might as well tell you what the purpose statement is, and so the listeners can actually understand what I'm talking about. So my purpose statement has 5 points. It's discover is 1, and build is 2. So it's discover and build new things that make a difference in people's lives, that give me the flexibility. So flexibility is really key to pursue outdoor recreation with my family. So if you think about it, discover, build new things, difference in people's lives, flexibility, outdoor recreation. Hence why I said earlier in my life, I had been looking in sports marketing. So I use that as my criteria for literally identifying what are those things I like to do. And part of that is you introduced me as the assistant golf coach at Fordham. Well, that actually ends very soon. And part of that was it no longer fit the flexibility side. It was just too much time away from my family and too much time interfering with other things. And quite honestly, it was probably also getting to the point where starting to violate the new, it wasn't new to me anymore, but it was really about time. So I use that as a way. And now I'm coaching. I still want to be in golf. I'm working with a charitable organization that teaches golf to primarily underprivileged or disadvantaged kids in Brooklyn as a way of introducing them to a life sport. It's a relatively new charity, and they've brought me in to kind of help develop more programs for kids. So it's new to me. It certainly makes a difference in people's lives. It gives me flexibility because it's 1 day a week and it works at a time where I can work around it. And certainly, if you think about outdoor recreation, I'm on a golf course with these kids. So it actually hits all 5 of them. So that's how I'm approaching things.
I love this because I think I said it before, but it feels like you've crafted your own fit. You took all these little elements, and this is one of the things that I've been discovering, to use that word, I've been discovering in my own conversations with folks is, when you take a look back at all of these potentially or seeming misfit type of opportunities, there's little things that you pull out of each one of those opportunities that you learn something about yourself. You discover something about yourself. And it may not have worked in that company or at that job, but I learned that I really liked X, Y, and Z. And so what I love about kind of how you built this is you've crafted your own fit. And something else that kind of struck me too is there's a lot out there about, values-based, right? And having a values-based approach. I know that I've gone through my own set of values. And what I love about this purpose statement is it's almost taking those values and actually putting it into something that's digestible. Like I know what my 5 values are. My first one being about authenticity. Sassy's going to show up because I realize when I put sassy, when that light is off, I'm not living me. I don't feel like me. But that took me some time to really realize that. But now I want to go, it's actually a good homework assignment for me is to go back to my values and kind of put it into that purpose statement. And I do think, it's interesting. When you and I first started talking about this, when your students really brought up the idea of a podcast, and then I, a few months later, many months later, actually decided to bring it into fruition, we talked a lot about this as well, around the things that really ignite me. They're my values, but they're also the things that I'm passionate about. So for me, it's around I love talking to people. I had the gift of gab when I was, 5, 6, 7 years old. My mom used to put tape over my mouth because I wouldn't stop talking. And now
Shocking.
shocking, right? But now I'm using it to my advantage because it's something that I enjoy doing. I enjoy connecting other people's stories for the benefit of everyone else. But I didn't know that all the way through my career. And it wasn't until probably 3 or 4 jobs into it. In fact, when we got into a lot of our sales organization, that I realized what it was about marketing, what it was about PR, and what it was about client relationships that I really enjoyed. And I found that connective tissue to create my own fit, which is where I am now. But I think one of the things that I want to touch on a little bit is You talked about that great manager that you had, that really said, I want to put you through this coaching. Can you talk a little bit about um, the impact of mentors around coaches, advocates, all of that in terms of kind of really pulling it together? How important have those been in building your career set?
Yeah. And, you made a point a little while ago around um, taking pieces throughout your career that help mold the career now. And a big theme was from a lot of them from mistakes. So I didn't understand the importance of mentorship, of of someone who is your champion, of networking, and quite honestly, I didn't do any of it. Very much to my detriment. And in my first few companies that I worked, it was actually a little bit taboo to sort of promote yourself and do this. So when I got to places like American Express and everyone's like out in the open having coffee and talking about it, champions, I'm like, well, this is a foreign concept to me. So the advice I would give to people is I think you need many people in your corner, right? You need a mentor, and that mentor is someone who sits on your shoulder and just gives you direction. Then you need a champion. When you are looking for your next job, who is that champion that is going to go to the hiring leader and say, you need to hire Sarah? That champion is different than your mentor, because you need your mentor just simply to be that honest voice on your shoulder.
Yeah. And the champion's like the person who's in the room when you're not there, advocating on your behalf in the rooms that they are in that you may not yet be invited to.
Right. And then
Yeah.
you also need other advocates. One of the things I do in my brand management classes, we actually stop halfway through the semester and we do an assignment called the brand of you. And we take everything that we've learned about managing brands, and I have them do this incredibly uncomfortable exercise. It's not the same as a purpose statement, but I actually have them write a brand statement about themselves. And they have to go through the uncomfortable exercise of, what are your differentiators? What are your reasons to believe? What are the things that make you different, and then articulate it. So getting students to do that, I have found I get more comments and thanks from that than anything else we talk about. And I try to encourage people to go out there and find those mentors, find those champions, and then build your brand. So when we do the brand of you, it's not only the positioning statement, is what is your brand plan? So if you think about yourself, your brand, you as a product, your product is what all your knowledge is and what you can deliver. So how do you improve your product, right? It's about taking classes, doing certain assignments, learning more things. If you think about your brand as the promotion side, how are you going to promote yourself? It's things like never eat alone, have at least 5 coffee chats a week, redo your resume, really leverage LinkedIn profile. There's not just your profile, but the whole platform. So what are those things you need to do? A good friend of mine from my old college roommate, the guy who we used to make fun of the most, a number of years ago became president of a multi-$100 million healthcare business. And I called him right after he got to be president. And I said, did you expect this to happen? Did you think this would ever happen? And he said, well, yeah, I've been planning this. And I said, well, what do you mean? He goes, well, I've been working with a coach for 10 years. So he started this when he was in his probably late 30s. Probably even before that, he had some very good mentors. And he actually told me that later on, before he became president, in that year or two leading in, he was spending 20% of his working time managing his career and making sure that all the people around the organization knew what he was doing. So it was a lot of promotion. He did a lot of product development of him as the product, and making sure that the board of directors knew who he was. 20%. I'm just telling my students, get out there and do one thing a day. And that one thing could be a 5-minute LinkedIn, or it could be a coffee chat with someone. But everyone listening, take it from my old roommate, right? You need to manage your career because no one else will be your champion. Yeah. Well, I mean, your mom will be, but she doesn't carry any weight whatsoever in corporate America. So you've got to go do it. That's probably the best advice anyone could take away from today.
Yeah. It's funny. When I was working in PR, we used to always talk about you had to do PR for PR, right? Like we
Right.
were always the ones that were behind the scenes getting, our executives visibility and doing all this stuff. But it's, you had to do PR for PR. You have to tell people what it is that you do. And, going back to that being uncomfortable aspect of it, you learn to get good at it. You start to figure out like who needs to hear about the things that either I'm doing or even importantly as a leader, what my team is doing. I need to make sure that they're getting that visibility because they may not be in the same rooms that I'm in. And so I want to make sure that they're getting that visibility within those groups too. But I also think the other piece about the uncomfortable aspect of it is I had a recruiter tell me, when I was looking through jobs, go out and talk to people that you worked with, that you worked for. I think I called you a couple times.
Yep.
And it was, what do you remember about me? What are my things that stood out? And I talked to a former boss that said something unsolicited to me. He said, I remember this is the kind of job that you should look for, Sarah, because what I remember about you is X, Y, and Z. And it was he remembered me standing up and being very lit up by helping connect a group of women leaders together. And I was so excited about it. And he was like, that's what you should be doing. And he did that. And it kind of got me out of my comfort zone a little bit because getting feedback, especially the positive feedback, you blush and probably right now, but it's going and asking people for that type of feedback because you don't know. You have a perception of yourself and the things that you're good at. Just like I have a perception of what my voice might sound like on this podcast. And then I play it back and I'm like, oh, very different. But I feel like that's a good kind of added step of go out and find out what other people think about you because it can add to the things that you're really good at.
Yeah. And that's actually the next part of the advice is, when I was young, people said, go network. What? Network with whom? What am I saying? What am I doing? And I approached these as, let me tell you these great things I'm doing. So it came off as like, great, but like, ease off, dude. What I found out later, and what I tell all my students now when they come to me for advice is, here's the way to get over that uncomfortableness of asking someone and trying to position it not as, by the way, look at all this great stuff I'm doing, but you need to get that out there. Say, hey, I would love to get some time. I'd love to get your advice. So two things happen. No one ever says no when you ask for their advice because you've just given them an ego boost and they want to help. But then secondly, in order to get their advice, they've got to ask you more about you and be prepared with your 30-second elevator spiel that I didn't have and a few key highlights to say, these are the kinds of things I've done. This is what I like to do. And they will walk away with that saying, wow, Sarah's a sharp woman. Like she's done some great stuff. So instead of self-promoting, flip it on its head. Ask for their advice. Next thing you know, you've actually promoted yourself and you've gotten that gift of feedback, which when I was younger, if someone gave me feedback, my blood pressure went to, 190 over 400 and my head was about to explode. And I never wanted it because it was so uncomfortable. But this is a way of flipping that script.
Yeah. I think there was a really good book when I first got into this fun employment stage that I was in for a while. There was a book around the 20-minute, how to have a 20-minute networking meeting. And it was recommended to me. And I remember reading it after I just had about 4 or 5 different networking calls with people. And I read it and I was like, oh, crap, I've been doing it all wrong from the very beginning. And I talk for a living. Like, this is what I do. And I realized how wrong I was in my networking. And you can do it in 20 minutes. We should be able to do these podcast episodes in 20 minutes, but brevity has never really been my strength. So I think it's about learning to be not only have your value proposition statement, right? Like have your purpose statement that you have, but it's also, and then be concise about it and then ask insightful questions, but it's also take the time at the end, find out where there's connection of where you can help them because it does. It kind of gives that person that chance to be like, oh, here's somebody who's not only just being like, I'm collecting feedback, and then exit stage right. You never hear anything. And then they come back and it's like, oh, hey, can you help me get a job with somebody? It's that opportunity to just build that relationship. And that I think was really important and a good learning that I had going through that networking and learning how to network better. It also made it a little bit less uncomfortable for me because there's almost a good framework.
Right. And that
go through that.
right? That takes away all the anxiety of going to do it. But you also said something else.
Not all of it. There's still a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, there always is, and there should be. You should have
Yeah.
one foot on solid ground and one foot in quicksand for all the stuff you do, because if you're not, then you're not growing, right?
Yeah.
But you said something really important is talking to other people to find out what you're good at.
Yeah.
And although throughout this process, I did that, and I learned like these unbelievable things that no one ever told me, like for years. For example, I was in one where they did tell me I was asked to speak on a panel for careers at American Express. And my leader at the time was also on the panel, which I thought was going to be uncomfortable, but it actually turned out to be great because he was the one who had told me earlier on some things that I didn't know I was great at. And the panel was, what's your superpower and which superhero are you? And he had actually told me without knowing, he told me that my superhero is Yoda, that's who I am. And I was like, well, Yoda's not a superhero, but then he reminded me that Yoda can raise an X-Wing fighter out of a swamp without even touching it, so therefore he's a superhero. But he told me, he said, over the last 6 years, every single person, and again, the culture at Amex was 2 years and move and 2 years and move, but every single person, I had a team of anywhere from 3 to 6 or 7 people. Every single person that left my team over a 6-year period left for a promotion. And to me, it was just these people were ready. They were due. Some of them had been overlooked for years. But I just kind of mentored them to help them do those things that I was really terrible at in the past. And they all got promoted. So my leader said to me, because the reason I think of you as Yoda is you have a way of identifying people who are the next Jedi Knight. So you have those skills. And then you train and coach them to become that Jedi Knight. And I looked at him and I was like, what are you talking about? Like, I had no idea. And then later on, during the process of this whole discovery, I was having drinks with a former team member of mine who had been one of those people in a string of these unbelievable people that worked for me. I was like, wow, I'm getting really lucky with these people. And he told me, he goes, well, don't you know? I was like, what? Don't I know what? And he said, well, after you started getting the reputation of people coming onto your team, that you gave them the opportunity to work on great things, gave them exposure, and they all got promoted. So he started naming off all these people. He goes, these 5 people before me all sought you out. And I was like, why didn't anyone tell me that? Whenever I went into my leader, I was like, when I was interviewing for jobs, I couldn't get promoted. I was like, I was never talking about that. I was never talking about what my superpower was. And there it was right in front of me, and everybody was talking about it, and I didn't know.
Well, it makes a whole lot of sense, right? For looking at where you are now, right? In terms of teaching and the benefit or, what that gives back to you. You enjoy that process of discovering and helping people discover things about themselves that maybe they didn't see, and starting to pull that out from them. I want to ask one other question, and it goes back a little bit. So we talked a lot about, looking for new opportunities, and you get to that opportunity, but when you're in it, how do you know when it's like time to go?
The sad part is sometimes you don't know for a while. So I think people should keep an eye out for red flags. Some of those red flags are, one, if you have a bad boss. And I specifically use the term boss because if you have a leader, by definition, they're not bad. Right? But if you have someone who's a boss, they're bad. And that could be someone with a horrible temper, a massive ego, someone who, doesn't want you going around talking to other people, is very protective and is a micromanager. If they're butting heads with all the other leaders, the sad part is that reflects on you. And they may not look at you and say, oh, Sarah's terrible, therefore you must be terrible. But we've all had bad bosses throughout our life. And I think, when I started my career, it was like, well, you got to suck it up. And at some point they'll leave. But that doesn't always happen. And now it's also much more okay to leave a job. Whereas I was like, I'm not leaving a job. And plus financially, I certainly couldn't. But I would say if you really have one of those bosses that's horrible, and I can point to 4 that I've had in my career, that's a lot, that were truly horrible.
Wow.
It doesn't help your mental health. You need to get out as soon as possible. And if you can financially do it, you just go. If you need the money, then let your work fall through. Focus instead of 20% on your career, 70%, but get the hell out. The other would be there's always signs around the organization, and there's two things that I kind of looked for. I learned later on. One is companies like Amex, not so much Visa, but at Citibank, at Viacom, there were constant reorganizations. So when you're at the more junior levels, the worst thing you could do is put your head in the sand and assume it's not going to impact you. I would say it almost always impacts you, whether it's a new job that you may or may not want, or you get laid off. So I think you should approach this as you have to assume that you're going to lose your job during a reorganization. And that makes you think, okay, if I lose my job, what am I going to do? And either it will make you start looking right then and there, or you may say, you know what, that might be okay. If I lost my job, I'll take my package. That might be okay. I need a mental break. So I think that's something you have to, really assume. And then during those reorgs, if you're more senior, if you are not part of the conversation, that means you're impacted. So if you're a VP or higher, if you're not involved at all in any part of those conversations, then you have to really assume you've lost your job. And that's critical. And I think, most people don't quite understand that. And then here's the third thing. I call it the 3 strikes and out rule. And that doesn't mean you've screwed up 3 times and you're going to get fired. But if you are going for a promotion to the next level and you don't get it, well, that could be for a lot of reasons. Maybe there was someone at the last minute that the CEO was recommending for the job, or maybe there was someone that just had better credentials. So 1 time's okay. 2 times, if you don't get it, you have to start questioning. The 3rd time you don't get the promotion, you must leave. And it is not because you're a bad person. It's because you have not done the job to get your advocates and mentors and everybody lined up behind you. Because at the end of the day, especially when you're going to a more senior level, the people that are making that decision are not the hiring leader. It is people above them. And if you haven't done the work to get there, you're not going to get the job. And after 3, senior management looks at you and says, well, maybe they're never going to get promoted. And so I would say, get out. And even on the more junior levels in places like Amex, where it's, every 2 years and move, I remember vividly, we were hiring a senior manager level. So it's a good job. It's a really good job, but it's not very senior. And we had made a decision. I actually was not the one who wanted to hire this person. I thought she'd be okay. My leader, I should call her a boss, was enamored with her. And so I was like, look, I'm not going to fight this fight because I'm probably going to be out of this role soon. And I was asked to bring the resume, just, hey, run it by the EVP. And I ran it by the EVP, and he looked at it and said, didn't even read the resume. Said, the person's been in their job for more than 3 years. I'm not even interested. Period. End of story. So understand the corporate culture you're in. 3 strikes and you're out. You got to go somewhere else, because that just means senior management doesn't recognize your talents and skills. And many times it's because you just simply haven't done a good enough job promoting yourself. And it doesn't mean you're a bad employee. You're not going to get promoted after 3. So move on.
I was just going to say that because, sometimes if you've gone for that promotion and it's been 3 times, it doesn't mean that you suck at your job. I mean, it might.
No.
It might,
Well,
but it doesn't mean that it could very well be, going back to the bad boss, that hasn't really laid out the expectations for you very well. And so you're not meeting the expectations of that boss. So that person's boss is saying, wait a minute, this person is a misfit, right? They're just not doing, but it may also be that you're in the wrong job. And it's going back to something that you said earlier, especially from a senior leadership perspective. It's, you could be out tomorrow. You could also redesign a whole org and move yourself out. But it's understanding, and I think this kind of goes back and ties a nice bow to where we were. It's as you're going through each one of these roles. And one of the pieces of advice I often give is take stock. Like, if you're done and you're done, when you're done, take a moment before you go into that next role and before you leave that and say, what did I like about this job? What, to our point earlier, what lit me up? What did I love? What did I hate? Why did I hate it? And is there another way to look at it that I want to make some different decisions in my next role? And then
Yep.
each one of those roles, like over the course of 10 years that I was at a company, I had 5 or 6 different jobs, and I picked up something in each one of
Yep.
those that by the time I was leaving my last company, I knew that there was some things that just were not right, both for me and for them. I wasn't the right fit for them. They weren't the right fit for me. And it was, okay, I know now, and I've spent the time to really go through and really identify what those things are that make me light up. So take that stock in the job that you're in. Identify what those things are so that 10 years from now, when you look back on this career journey, you can start to really thread that needle of all those different roles, and they don't feel so misfitty along the way.
Yeah, and that really what you're doing with all that is you're taking ownership and responsibility for your career, as opposed to, if you're not getting these promotions, it probably means you haven't done that. So go for it.
Yeah. I love that. So I want to round us out. I always like to spend the last little part of these podcasts with a little bit of quick fire round.
Okay, fire away.
So my first quick fire question for you, Paul, is what podcasts are you currently listening to, or alternatively, what books are you reading?
I'll do both. So
Okay.
podcasts, like I've been living under a rock for a long time, but I recently discovered Revisionist History, which is a Malcolm Gladwell. And I'm at the gym listening to those every day. And he talks about things are usually overlooked or misunderstood, and they're fascinating. I encourage everyone to listen to the one about laundry detergent. It sounds horrible, but it's amazing. You'll never do your laundry again the same way. In terms of books, I don't know if I've ever told you this. My sister-in-law is actually a best-selling author. So she writes under the name of Garvey Black, and she just is about to release, I think, her 9th book. Don't tell her this. Well, she's probably going to listen, but I'm a little bit behind. I'm reading the book. It's called The First Husband, which was kind of a psychological thriller that I recommend to everybody.
I love it. This one I didn't prep you for, but in all of these misfit roles that you've had, what's the weirdest job that you've ever had?
I don't know if I've ever had a weird job, because they've all been in those marketing and business development. Although I would say one of my first jobs out of college, I was working in a bank training program, and I was managing a customer service group, which was just so not me, because it was very operational. It was really old school. And it was more, I had to put the hat on of me being more of the boss than the leader, because that's what was asked of me to do. And that's kind of where I learned a little bit. Like, I knew it wasn't right, but I didn't know what was right. But this whole concept of servant leadership in the back of my brain, I was like, wait a minute, I should actually be working for them and knocking things out of the way so they could do their job. But that's not what I was directed to do. So that was really weird for me. That was the biggest misfit of all the jobs I've ever had.
On the flip side of that, if you could have any job for one day, regardless of skill or qualification, what would it be and why?
Oh, God, I'd be a sportscaster. I could broadcast baseball, football, basketball games. I could make up shit as well as anybody else. I think it'd be hilariously fun. I would probably be terrible at it, but that would be amazing.
Okay, do you do like my husband does while we're watching sports, and he calls stuff out, and then I hear the sports announcer say almost the exact same thing, and I do this look at him. I'm like, how did you know that? And I'm like, I don't have any sports in my background as far as things.
No, I keep my mouth shut usually, but I would love to do that. That'd be fun.
Your wife is a lot luckier than I am on that point. What's your favorite way to unwind after a busy work day?
Am I allowed to say alcohol? No, it's probably not it. I drink actually very little. I kind of took up a habit of pizza making, and I make amazing. I don't mean to pat myself on the back, but I make amazing pizza. And sometimes when shit hits the fan, I will just start making pizza.
Do you have a favorite pizza that you like to make?
Oh, I'm a purist. I think that it should be a margarita because you can't hide mistakes under crazy toppings. If you've screwed up a margarita, it's not going to be good. But when it's good, it's unbelievable.
Oh my gosh, we say the exact same thing. Every time you go and try out a new pizza place, just order a straight cheese or a margarita, because if you get that wrong, then nothing else is going to go right.
Absolutely.
All right, last question. If you had a theme song that played every time you walked into a room, what would it be?
Oh, Thunder Road, Bruce Springsteen, one of the greatest pieces of music and lyrics ever written.
Okay. I can't say that I'm going to be able to get that one to play on the podcast at some point. It might be a little out of my price range, but
Yeah, I was going to say he just sold his song book for $500 million, so you probably can't afford that.
no, I'll look to see if I can get some sponsorship to cover that one the next time around. Well, Paul, thank you. That kind of wraps up our rapid fire, but I want to thank you so much for taking the time to share your perspectives. I love this idea around the purpose value proposition, especially around the discover and build. I love what you've done to kind of craft your own fit off of a series of Misfits. I think it's just been a really great journey. I'm so excited to see where this next fit goes for you. Thank you for taking the time. Thank you for, again, inviting me in from the very first day and to see where we are now. So up until next time, everybody, keep it sassy, Misfits. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks. I have worked with some amazing people in my career, like Paul, and he has just continued to grow and change in his career. And when I first met him, I was so impressed with his background and his passion. He instantly gave me those professor vibes, you know the ones. So I'm really not surprised that he is now teaching some very lucky students. Okay, let's dive into some of the highlights. This episode was packed with insights on crafting a fulfilling career path, even when you feel like you might be a misfit, and knowing how to get out of that when you do. So, first up, Paul shared his journey of discovering his purpose. After years in corporate America feeling like something was missing, he worked with a coach to create a purpose statement. His purpose statement had 5 key points that now guide his career decisions. Okay, now everyone's points are probably going to be a little bit different, but it's that discovery that makes the journey worthwhile. No matter what stage you're at in your career, it's never too late to figure out what truly drives you and what lights you up. So, your action item this week, take some time for self reflection. What are those moments in your career when you have felt most energized, most fulfilled? Write those insights down and use them to craft your own purpose statement and revisit it until it fits. Second, Paul emphasized the importance of managing your own career. He shared a story about his college roommate who became the company president by dedicating 20% of his work time to career management. Okay, that might seem like a lot, but here's your action item. I want you to start small. Commit to doing one career management related task each day, whether it's updating your LinkedIn profile or having a coffee chat with a colleague. Invest in you and your career, and it'll pay off. Third, Paul highlighted the value of mentors, champions, and advocates in your career. He stressed that you need different people playing different roles, mentors for guidance, champions to promote you for jobs, and advocates to speak up for you when you're not in the room. Your action item here, identify who's currently in your corner and where you might need to build new relationships. Reach out to someone this week and ask for their advice. It's a great way to start building those connections. And finally, Paul talks about recognizing when it's time to move on from a job. He shared his 3 strikes rule. If you've been passed over for a promotion for 3 times, it's probably time to start looking elsewhere. But it's not just about promotions. Bad bosses, constant reorganizations, or simply feeling that you are no longer growing are all signs that might be time for a change. So, your action item this week, take a look around at where you are today. Regularly assess your current role. Ask yourself if you're a little bored. Can you confidently say that you are still learning and growing? If not, start exploring some new opportunities, either within your company or elsewhere. Remember, crafting a career that fits you, it's an ongoing process. It's about continually learning, adapting, and sometimes taking some big risks. So keep exploring, keep growing, and most importantly, keep being your unique misfit self. That's it for this episode. We'll see you next week. Keep it sassy, Misfits.